So this is the first of the webinars for the IFLA working programme of urban health. And my name is Simon Bell, Professor of Landscape and Wellbeing at the University of Edinburgh, and I'm the director of the working programme. So today we have the first of these webinars, which are going to be recorded because we understand that not everybody around the world can join them live. In fact, there's huge gaps, obviously, and we're having to do it. So we're late at night in Europe and very early in the morning in New Zealand. So that's quite an interesting challenge in its own right. So we have the first of these, and the theme, what if cities can make us well, or worse, that effect. So let me introduce the participants. So we're going to be starting off with Dr. Gail Souter-Brown, who's based in New Zealand. So it's early morning for her. And she's founder and director of research and the design consultancy called Greenstones Design, originally in the UK since 2005, and then set up in New Zealand in 2012. And while we are setting up these webinars to have both practitioners and researchers, well, it's difficult necessarily occasionally to find people who are only a practitioner or only a researcher or only, you know, we tend to mix around a little bit. So Gail has the practice, Greenstone Design, but also has done research for her PhD, and she wrote the book Landscape and Urban Design for Health and Wellbeing using healing, sensory and therapeutic gardens. And she's tested environmental design practice with a proper, let's say, randomized control trial type experiment, and has presented the findings of her work internationally to many different audiences. So Gail is sort of representing practice, but also does research. And then we are joined by Basma Khaled, who is a design architect and researcher specializing in urban health and salutogenic design. And at the moment, she's an assistant lecturer in the Department of Architecture at Cairo University, so in Egypt. And her research interests focus on the role of urban landscape and green spaces in supporting mental well-being and resilience, particularly in developing contexts and challenging climates like the hot deserty climate of Egypt. Basma has a master's degree in architecture, where her research explored evidence-based approaches to salutogenic urban design, and she is one of the members of the this working program of urban health. And I should just mention also that Gail is the vice director or co-director of this working program. So that's by way of introduction. So over to you, Gail, for your presentation. And after that, we'll have any questions and answers regarding Gail's contribution very briefly, and then we'll have Basma, and then we'll have further discussion until we kind of run out of time. Okay, so that's enough from me. So I'll mute my microphone. I have a bit of a cold. You might tell I'm a bit bunged up, so I might sneeze or something, so I'll make sure I'm muted so I don't disturb the proceedings, because my sneezing can be quite loud. Gail, over to you. And welcome.
Thank you, Simon. I'm delighted to be here. Kia ora tātou. Greetings, everybody around the world. What we're going to talk about today is we're starting off this urban health webinar series, and we're talking about workplace well-being initially, and what we can do to create healthy spaces in our cities with this landscape lens. So what if cities could heal us? Apparently well people have been an underserved research subject area. We tend to concentrate on marginalized populations, people with disabilities, but in actual fact, the majority of people manage to get by in the world. And so it's those people without those marked impediments that we are focusing on here today, looking at urban health through this landscape lens. So we recognize complexity. There's nothing simple about what we do and how we do it, or in the world in which we operate as practitioners or as researchers. So we create places where people thrive, nature flourishes, and finances blossom. And that economic argument is a key feature that you'll notice through the presentation here today. We add serenity, biodiversity, and natural materials to the workplace to raise productivity, reduce stress, and improve well-being. We also ensure landscape design interventions are artistically focused, but around specific evidence-based outcomes. How we do this is we're going to go through 6 case studies, the first of which is a research case study. So the background around workplace wellbeing, the apparently well population are, depending on which metrics we use, between 70 and 95% of the population. However, all of us, wherever we are, have to deal with chronic stress on a daily basis, living in urban centres. And that affects our well-being and our lifestyle choices and our physical health. So research shows the importance of nature to reduce stress and improve health, and how to design spaces to impact those health outcomes is now well established. And the theory suggests that sensory gardens can support lifestyles, healthy lifestyles in the apparently well, whereas they have focused previously historically on people with impediments. So to dive in, the first case study was based around the question, could a sensory garden be a viable self-help tool for staff and students on a campus in New Zealand? And so we conducted a randomized controlled trial, that gold standard of health research. So as if we were trialing a new drug, but in this case, we were trialing vitamin N for nature. And we had 165 participants aged between 18 and 65. As per the research protocol, we had 2 intervention groups and a control group. The intervention groups were given an appointment with nature of 30 minutes once a week. And that time was established off another study that worked out that the minimum dose of nature required for health and well-being, being 30 minutes once a week. So that's working from the minimum. And we were wanting to see whether we could see an effect from that minimum. The 2 intervention sites were comparably sized and oriented, an existing plaza, and a new sensory garden. The new sensory garden, you'll see, has 6, 7 different surfacing materials between grass and bark and sand and shell chip soil, as opposed to the existing plaza, which was predominantly hard paved with trees in straight lines, seating in straight lines. So you've got a much more complex space here. Everyone was tested pre-intervention and then post-intervention for salivary cortisol to measure their physiological stress, also their perceived stress, perceived well-being, their productivity, nature-relatedness, and their lifestyle, their physical activity, diet, sociability. And what we found was interesting. So the findings from the sensory garden group were statistically, clinically, and socially significant. And so we found an almost 20% reduction in cortisol. So the yellow here on the graph are the statistically significant results, which as a scientist is what we can report. So we had an almost 10% gain in this perceived well-being using the flourishing scale, and an almost 5% gain in productivity, this perceived work output. And then because it was a mixed method study, a fully rounded study, we had the qualitative to inform the backstory of this quantitative data. And what people told us, unprompted, was that their lifestyle had improved. They exercised more, they ate more mindfully. They reported enhanced problem solving, cognitive function. They could have difficult conversations with their partners, with their boss. They took their children outside to play more. They reduced recreational drug use. One woman took herself off long-term antidepressants. She'd been on apparently for the last 12 years after just 4 sessions of 30 minutes in the sensory garden. So these are profound results after such a short intervention. And then we did a follow-up 6 months later, and those findings were sustained. So the cost benefits were also extraordinary. So it cost 25,000 New Zealand dollars to design and develop the sensory garden. 250,000, $250,000 New Zealand dollars to design, develop the plaza. Absenteeism costs over $4 billion annually in New Zealand alone. So when people are unwell, or if they feel unwell, so their perceived well-being, that has a big part to play in whether they turn up at work. Similarly, presenteeism, when you work when you are unwell, costs even more, $4.3 billion annually. And so we know that things like physical activity impacts absenteeism. It keeps people well. It means that people recover from any illness faster. Nature relatedness, nutrition, relationships, recreational drug, this perceived stress, all of these things were positively impacted by 30 minutes once a week in the sensory rich, biologically diverse place of refuge in the workplace. Meanwhile, after time in the plaza, we had a 3% drop in physical activity, 1% drop in nature relatedness, and a 16% increase in perceived stress. So they were outside. So this was what was telling us that just being outside is not enough. The design of that space is critically important. So they felt, even though their cortisol had actually dropped, but they felt that they were more stressed. So psychologically, they were unwell, and that was after time in this plaza environment. So it's not just enough to have conducted a randomized controlled trial and tested what we thought we knew. We also put all this information into practice. And so as a design practitioner, so I'm founder and director, as Simon mentioned, of two design consultancies, Greenstone Design UK and Greenstone Design in New Zealand. And so between the two consultancies, we work globally. And so what I'd like to present now are some places where we have applied this knowledge, this research, this understanding in real life, in real terms for commercial clients. And so this case study was a children's centre in England where they wanted us to improve the educational and social outcomes. It was in a particularly socioeconomically deprived area at the time. It was the worst in all of Western Europe. And we tackled the design brief by bringing the space to life with a sensory play garden. So before we had a fairly standard looking, tired, up, down sort of play equipment with a bit of grass and a tree, but a lot of hard paving. And we brought it to life with planting again. It was actually judged and awarded the best playground in the UK. This was back in 2010. So what the judges commented on in particular was they particularly liked the use of edibles. So we put fruit trees and fruiting vines around the side of the playground, which literally, figuratively brought the space to life. And the effect of this, again, was profound. So the attendance of the children improved, but there was a ripple out effect through the community, whereby community drugs and antisocial behaviour cycles that were ingrained in this community, that cycle was broken. There now became a waiting list for children to get into the school, housing prices locally raised, and it was a really interesting urban transformation, community transformation, based off this ripple effect of a very simple design intervention here in the Children's Centre. Similarly, but completely differently, we worked with the Anglo-American International School in Moscow. And there, the children were children of diplomats and of local oligarchs. and very high functioning, very high performing families. And so the children were under a lot of stress, the parents were under a lot of stress, they're all high achievers, go, go. And so what the school wanted to do was to reduce the children's and the parents' stress. And so the parents came on site, so they needed to be encouraged to come on site, because otherwise it was just the nannies or the bodyguards that brought the children to school. So once again, we created this sensory-rich, stimulating natural play environment. So previously it had been predominantly paved, and then there were a couple of pieces of standard manufactured play equipment. So we went in and we ripped up, here we had a substantial budget, and we took up the asphalt, we planted berms, so we still maintained emergency services access, which was an important part of the brief, but we then brought the space to life. It had to be robust enough ecologically to be able to withstand being under snow for 6 months of the year. The children went outside every day unless it went below minus 19 degrees Celsius. So they had to be able to have somewhere to go that enticed them to get outside, have fun, and have all that nature connection that we know that reduces stress. And it did. And so it had, again, that ripple out effect through the parent community. So these are very diverse settings, but a similar sort of a premise. At a care home that we worked in Portugal, the design brief basically was to get people outside. And so it was a lovely space initially. It had trees, it had grass. And so in many ways you could argue, well, come on, they had a nice place. They had a nice space. Why wasn't it used? But as with many parks, as with many workplaces, if we go back to the workplace example, it was sterile, it was lifeless. In terms of birds and butterflies and bees, there was nothing much going on. And so once again, we started from the ground up, we improved the soil, and we brought the space to life. And so we introduced textures, we introduced planting for year-round interest. And so what we found was that residents who were previously reluctant to be outside, they were now confident to try new forms of therapy. And so the physiotherapists, the occupational therapists, they found they had better success with their treatment programs, all because of the environment outside. It was the only thing that the staff could put it down to. Nothing else in the centre had changed. And suddenly people were going outside, families were visiting more, and they had a nice space to go year round. Again, completely different setting, but the same sort of pattern repeating. We worked with an eco resort in Sabah in Malaysia, and there the brief was to develop a new unique selling proposition for the resort. So the neighbouring resort, their competitor in the marketplace, had orangutans. And there was no way that I was going to try and compete with having orangutans on this site. So I said, okay, what could we do that was going to be special to this particular client, their setting, what was going on that was special that we could enhance for them. And so we brought in the nature of the buildings meant that they had an internal courtyard area that we could net the roof of. And so we created a butterfly garden that happened to have the hotel kitchens on the ground floor. And so we could develop a cafe easily. And then the tropical fish in this tropical area, we put in boardwalks out with glass viewing platforms inset into the boardwalk. And so people could go out of an evening with the light on the water and see the fish and bring it all in close. And then all the gardens around the resort, it's a 50-acre resort, we put in interactive plantings where people could get up close and smell that really deep fragrance of the tropical blooms and see the really varied planting. And having done all of this, the hotel reported increased sales figures. They had visitor satisfaction increase. And we did this around healthy people, healthy planet. And we also here brought in the community, which was another big part of what we do, is that community benefit. So we brought in community vendors, the hawker stalls, local vendors with bicycle mounted offerings for the resort guests, that brought the space again to life with people as well as plants, as well as that wildlife interest. And then our final case study was from a retirement village in New Zealand, where after COVID, so people had been kept indoors, staff burnout was a real issue, and quality of life for the residents was also an issue. And so similar but completely different motivations to the care home in Portugal, we needed to get people outside. So similar demographic here, but the people were able-bodied. And so once again, we put in this sensory-rich, biodiverse sensory garden with the seasonal interest planting, with music, with art. And what we found again was decreased demands on staff, where residents were happy to carry on with their lives without feeling anxious. So anxiety levels dropped in the residents, which overall improved the outcomes for the staff and also for the residents. And the impact of this was reduced cost of care. So by investing a relatively small amount into this sensory garden space, which was then anchored in the wider landscape of this retirement village, it again had this ripple out effect across the village. Now, as we'll know, anybody who works in this space, it's all very well having a great idea, having a design, having it implemented, having it developed, but without the appropriate maintenance regime, it's all for nothing. It can be a net cost rather than that net asset. So my 4 steps to success. Firstly, organic practices. If we put poisons in, we get poisons out. So that healthy ecology for healthy humans, that's fundamental. If we have a very simple design, we find that the community are able to become involved. And a really good example of this is the Skyline Park in New York, where it was developed as a community asset in the old above ground railway. And sections of that park are allocated to particular community groups with oversight still from the city, but the community have taken ownership of it. And that ownership is part of that wellbeing effect. This maintenance also comes back to the management and allowing people to be involved, allowing them to interact with the space supports that sense of control. So whether they are allowed to pick the flowers or eat the herbs, as in Paris down the periphery, on the old periphery, the Les Sept Berges, the 7 barges, where urban food growing is happening at scale, where people can, on their way home from work, pick and eat vegetables or herbs, salad greens, fruit, are allowed to move seats, allowed to climb trees. This is all the sense of permission that supports that sense of control. And we need to remember to be consultative. We work with communities rather than for or giving them work, sort of providing it to them. So anytime we are changing environmental design, it's really important to work from the ground up. It's easy to come in from the top down and say, this is what you need. We are the experts, we know, but we get much better, much more sustained results if we take that bottom-up approach and work with the community. So in summary then, apparently well people benefit from healing spaces. We know, all the data shows us, all our experience shows us that anybody with any sort of disability, any social disadvantage, they do particularly well. But if we've got an almost 20% reduction in salivary cortisol from the well people, that's extraordinary. Standard exposure to just a park, you'd expect about a 5% drop in cortisol, we had an almost 20% drop. So salutogenic design principles, that is what Basman's going to be talking about shortly, where we are designing for health promotion to support health and well-being, can provide healthy, livable cities. Everyone needs their everyday space to feel safe, to provide that sense of refuge and connection. And ultimately, urban health requires serenity, biodiversity, and natural materials. And we can do this. Public and private space can become a metaphor for life, with playful, relaxing places that are a little bit messy, because life is a little bit messy, even on a good day. And that's what nature teaches us. And with this in the background, we then have that resilience built, and we are able to respond to the stressors of everyday life. So, kia ora, shukran, merci, danke, sheisha. Thank you so much for your time here today. If you would like any assistance, the Urban Health Working Program, as Simon mentioned, I'm co-director, Simon's director. We've got a fabulous team of global people who are here to help you. So peer review, speaking, mentoring assistance. If you need any help at all, please do get in touch. Thank you. Simon, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Gail. That was very interesting, very inspiring. There are no questions so far from the guests, but I have a question, and it's about the relationship of research and practice in a way, particularly the project that you showed first, which was the randomized controlled trial, and you had the control plaza, and then you had the design.
Yeah.
But the design didn't emerge just from your head as a cool place. It came from somewhere. So what was the evidence base that you used to start with, or the theory for the design, which you then tested and then learned about this kind of circular between,
That's a very good question.
theory, evidence, back to theory, and so on?
Thank you for asking. Okay, so the design inspiration came from the University of Alnap's Healing Garden space. So they have a therapy garden that they offer as a fully facilitated experience for, initially it was designed for people suffering from burnout. And so they have a team of experts there, psychiatrists, psychologists, occupational therapists who work with people through a 6 week, 6 month program. And so I was inspired. I visited the place on a study tour and thought, this is interesting. And having worked as a practitioner, particularly with disabled populations around the world, I thought, I wonder what would happen if we applied this logic, this knowledge to the apparently well. And then I was also interested in the unfacilitated side of things. And so it was taking everything that I knew as a practitioner. So ALNUP was designed in 4 sections. So they had a sense of progression that went through, so that you could sort of start. And when you entered the garden, you were particularly stressed and upright. And then, so places for one person to sit. And then the next zone was slightly more relaxed and more meandering paths, places for 2 people to sit, right through to the communal space at the end, where groups would come together when the stress levels had dropped and people were feeling more sociable. So that was the theory behind it. In practice, it didn't work that way. So the apparently well came in, yes, they were stressed, but they came in to a spot and they generally stayed there. Some walked the path for their 30 minutes. Some slept. It was really interesting to see how they responded to the space. The only rules as such for both the plaza and the sensory garden group were that there were no digital devices allowed. And so they were there on their own. So they were allowed to talk to people, but they didn't have laptops, they didn't have phones, whatever with them. And so they could fully engage with the environment that they were in. And so, yeah, does that answer that question?
Yes, actually, because I kind of thought it might come from something like that, the Alnab, and the principles done by Patrick Rohn and Ulrika Stigsdotter and so on. But we
Indeed.
have a message in the Q&A from Sandra Schwartz, who says that sadly that the Alnab Garden closed since 2019. I didn't know that. That's very sad. I didn't know that.
Likewise. Yeah,
Yeah. But yes, I mean they have this they have these rooms, don't they? These spaces or rooms, or they had anyway, with particular qualities, rich in species, serene, and that kind of thing. And you should follow this. Well, that was the therapeutic, the managed
Yeah.
therapeutic approach, following this sequence and spending that time. But people just do what they want, don't they? And find a place that's really calming and they really enjoy being. They like sociable sometimes. They like to be by themselves sometimes. They like to be
exactly.
very close to nature sometimes. A bit of
Mhm.
artwork and some moving water is what enervates them, and that kind of thing. Yeah, yeah. Right. Uh, so it seems there are no more. Well, there's one question about where can we review this presentation. So that's a technical question
I
about the
think
fact that
YouTube would be the place to comment on the when it's posted onto YouTube.
onto the IFLA YouTube
Yeah,
site, that's where they're all going. And I
yes.
guess they're going to be batched according to the working program numbers and themes and things like this eventually. Yes. Right. Well, thank you. And now let's turn to Basma.
Yeah.
And over to you then, please. You can share your screen. Yes. Perfect.
Yes. Here we go. Hi, I'm Basma. From Egypt. I'm assistant lecturer in Cairo University, and now I'm going to talk about the theoretical part of our conversation today. Of what if cities could heal us, healing spaces for apparently well people. Uh, Gail talked about some interesting case studies that showed that people got really improved by being in nature and by being in sensory garden. But surely there is some evidence for that or some theory about this. We can start from Ottawa Charter 1986, which stated that health is created and lived by people within the setting of their everyday life. These core principles underscore that our social and built environments, cities, schools, workplaces fundamentally influence health. That's why today's talk frames architecture and urban health as upstream determinants of mental health, essentially a policy issue. We note that by 2050, around 68% of the world population will live in cities, making urban environments the primary setting for health promotion. Thus, architects and urban planners are, in effect, healthy policymakers. Building on this, we can examine how cities living affects mental health. Urbanization is accelerating. Today, 55% of people live in cities, right, and this is expected to rise to around 68 to 70% by 2050. While cities offer many benefits, epidemiology shows clear mental health risks. First, meta-analysis finds that city dwellers have about 20% higher risk of depression and 77% higher risk of psychosis and 21% higher risk of anxiety disorders than rural populations. These are large population level effects. Importantly, the longer the person in our or individual spends time in urban settings during their adolescence time or childhood, the higher the future risk of developing mental health problems. And despite these risks, roughly 70% of urban residents still remain apparently well. No diagnosis at any time, but many experience subclinical stress. And that's why we are talking about those people more, the people who are living or around us and the people who are us eventually. This group is crucial, and preventive interventions here could avert a predicted plus 77% rise in psychosis and plus 20% rise in depression across urban population. But here comes the question: why do our cities affect our mental health in a bad way? First, First thing, today's architecture often puts building front and center, with green space as thought of as an afterthought. This translates into less physical activity and less nature contact for urban residents, and consequently deteriorated health and well-being socially, psychologically, and behaviorally. For example, for this, who notes that lack of walking, cycle spaces, and green areas in cities help drive epidemics of non-communicable diseases, including depression. By contrast, opening design to nature has proven benefits. Research links greener neighborhoods to improved mental health. Neighborhoods with ample accessible green spaces show significantly lower rates of anxiety and depression, likely by both stress reduction and attention restoration mechanism. In fact, a systematic review found that proximity to parks boosts subjective well-being and protects especially vulnerable groups. So these ideas align with or a new term that is still not very familiar to many people. This term is salutogenesis. Salutogenesis is a term coined by Aaron Antonovsky in 1979, which literally means origin of health. Origin of health. He asked a question: what creates health rather than what causes disease? Salutogenesis wants us to shift our policy from reactive treatment to proactive health building. It emphasizes resources and environments that enhances well-being, rather than focus solely on risk factors. In our context, this means designing urban environments such as parks, housing, social spaces to produce health, a salutogenic approach. With this salutogenic lens, we target not just the people who are ill or are in hospitals, but the majority who are well but stressed. Let's talk about the apparently well people, individuals with no clinical diagnosis but exposed to urban stressors, noise, crowding. This silent majority fuels indirect costs. Stress erodes productivity and raises future health spending. For instance, high chronic stress can reduce work performance and increase sick leave. Therefore, health policy must proactively bolster well-being. What does this mean? This means that investing in supporting environments, green spaces, social community design, stress reduction initiatives aimed at prevention and resilience. By raising the baseline wellness of the entire population, we can ultimately reduce clinical incidents. One proven approach is leveraging nature's stress relief effects, which we explore next. Decades of research show nature exposure reduces stress. And there are two leading theories that can explain this. These theories are stress reduction theory and attention restoration theory. In brief, SRT posits that natural settings trigger an automatic relaxation response, heart rate and cortisol drop almost immediately. On the other hand, ART holds that time in nature allows our directed focus attention to replenish, improving mood and cognition. According to stress reduction theory, viewing nature is physiologically calming. Attention restoration theory says that nature heals mental fatigue. Both are grounded in evolutionary psychology and cognitive science. Humans evolved in natural environments, so our brains and bodies are hardwired for them. And now we will dive into each theory and see how they support urban design for health. The first one is a stress reduction theory, which was pioneered by Roger Ulrich. It posits that humans evolved to respond positively to non-threatening natural scenes, reducing physiological stress markers. Research shows that even brief exposure to green settings, such as windows with trees, parks, lowers blood pressure, cortisol, and brain activity in stress centers. This instant physiological recovery is core of SRT. In practice, SRT suggests that urban parks viewing of greenery gardens can immediately soothe people during daily stress. Um, Complementing SRT is attention restoration theory, which deals with cognitive aspects. Attention restoration theory was developed by Rachel Kaplan, which is grounded in environmental psychology. The idea of attention restoration theory is that urban life demands constant directed attention from work, from the traffic, from the daily life everyone has, which depletes our cognitive resources. Nature provides effortless fascination, and being away from routine let our senses gently engage. This allows the mental exhausted to recover. And evidence for this from research is that numerous studies shows that even a 20-minute walk in a park improves in performance on focused tasks compared to city walks. Putting together SRT and ART, we can explain how community green spaces improve mental health. Extensive research confirms that living in near quality green spaces lower anxiety, depression, and boosts well-being. Systematic reviews show substantial protective effects of neighborhood greenery on mental health. These improvements operate through multiple pathways, increased social interaction, through going to a community garden or a park, or through having to do more exercise and sensory engagement with nature. In disadvantaged groups, green spaces can especially reduce mental health disparities. For example, one review found that more nearby green spaces was associated with better self-reported well-being and fewer stress symptoms. So let's try to think of green spaces as multipliers. They instantiate SRT, which is about providing calm retreats, and ART, which is about offering mental recharge, plus being a good public good benefits. So this naturally leads to design interventions. One promising example is sensory garden, which Gil talked about in in the 5 or 6 case studies. Sensory garden is a deliberately designed green environment rich in stimuli, visual, auditory, olfactory, tactile, thermal, to engage all five senses. By translating SRT and ART into practice, these gardens provide immediate calm and fascination in one setting. And evidence base for this is horticultural therapy and garden interventions, which consistently show positive mental health effects. A recent research found that gardening green space activities significantly improve well-being and quality of life. And another study specifically on workplace sensory gardens found participants experience lower cortisol levels and reduced stress and higher productivity after short weekly visits. These benefits are attributed to the combined sensory engagement, boosting both relaxation, which means stress reduction theory, and attention restoration, which is ART. We can finally connect these insights back to our policy about how architecture can be the health intervention we do to our cities. In summary, the city is a setting for health, not just a collection of buildings. Our main argument is an upstream health. Our main argument is that architecture is an upstream health intervention, rather than reacting to illness, which is all the way being pathogenesis. We need to move to being proactively. We proactively build the health into urban design, which means a salutogenesis. The apparently well mandate captures this shift. We should try to protect the 70% of citizens currently healthy but at risk by designing environments that prevent mental illness. As King's College research noted, special planning can prevent an estimated 77% rise in urban psychosis and 20% rise in depression. Pragmatically, urban policy should integrate green infrastructure. Who emphasizes that strong urban policies must prioritize health for cleaner air, physical activity, social inclusion, and mental well being. Sensory rich, nature integrated design is not a decorative fluff. It's a biological imperative given our evolutionary wiring. This is where humans have evolved, and this is where we should protect the environments that they got used to. So if we ignore it, if we continue to design our cities the way we are designing it, we will be designing for disease. But if we change it our mindset, if we change it the policies that don't only put architecture in the core of it, but also give more attention to the landscape, not just as a decoration or an afterthought, we can embrace it. We can design for health. And that's it. Thank you for your listening, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you, Basma. That was really good and a very, very clear story about the theory and the evidence, which actually, in a way, should have been before Gail's, because Gail showed what works and you showed why it works, which was really nice. And I think you have a good future as a lecturer in front of you, because you're very clearly presenting the ideas in a way that everybody can follow and understand. You're from Cairo, and I was just again making a little comment in the chat that it's a big pity that in Cairo vehicle traffic has been prioritized and huge expressways, elevated expressways, have been pushed through formerly tree-lined streets, which had boulevards and cafes and nice street life. Now you've got these massive raised 4-lane highways battering through the city. So it's a real pity that, and the question then would be, how do you and your colleagues and others try to fight against this kind of movement and process that they're adopting in Cairo? How is it being addressed? Is it being addressed?
It is not really being addressed, to be honest. And this is a sad thing, because somehow in the last 10 years, we can see that pavements are removed to put some kiosk for people to sell something. And even all the gardens, all the trees, we can also remove them because we want to build this bridge to make the life for, because Cairo, yeah, it's big, but we are not supposed to go from the east to west in 5 minutes. Maybe we should teach people that we should live near our work or work near where we live. And yeah, that's very sad, because and that's why I'm saying that this should be a law or a policy that governments should really adapt, that we can't easily remove tree, or we can't easily remove a bark, and we can really sense this in times of festivals or these public holidays, where these people who are from low level or are not very rich, they don't have a place to go. So we just find them on the bridges, trying to look at the Nile or at these roundabout gardens, because we removed everything that is free for them to feel less stressed about life.
Yes, exactly. We should, and the problem is, it's not even being fully addressed properly in the global north to set a good standard and precedent and example for the global south.
Yeah, exactly.
And with people still wanting to be driving around and say, get from one side of the city to the other in 5 minutes. And where are they going? From one desert to another desert through the city,
Yeah.
which is rich and historical and everything. Yes. Right. Well, thank you very much, everybody. I think this is a good start and a nice mix where we're getting the theory and the practice, and we're getting the practitioner relating to theory, and we're getting the the researcher or teacher thinking about policy implications. So this is a very good way of connecting the sides of research, practice, policy, and so on. So I think it's been a good first webinar for us. And the next one actually will be featuring myself. So Gail will be moderating it. I'll be the researcher, and an Australian colleague from Brisbane will be presenting. Actually, it's research done by practitioners. And I'll be talking about research and tools for research. And they'll be talking about tools for practice, health, in fact, to do with reducing skin cancer by how to develop shade for kids in a over sunny climate in Queensland in Australia. Yeah. So, and I'll be talking about blue health, which is about blue spaces. Today we've focused on green spaces. Basma was mentioning green spaces, without forgetting that the Nile and the Nile tributaries are very important blue spaces for people to visit, and how they like to look at the Nile and so on. So I'll be relating my work in developing tools for understanding blue spaces. And then we'll also have the one about using shade and vegetation to create shade to reduce the risk of skin cancer. So another kind of health risk for people. So we look forward to that and the dates and times will be announced. And so I think we can draw this to a close and say thank you very much for attending. And we can stop the recording. Somebody can stop the recording. And then we can, we can finish. So thank you, and good morning to New Zealand, and good night to Europe, and
good afternoon to the Americas.
And good afternoon to the Americas. Yes, exactly. Yes.
There we go. Thank you, everybody. Yeah. We'll see you in 2 months' time, roughly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Good night. Good night. Good morning. Good afternoon. Good whatever you are.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.